Is your family tree a mystery? Are you fascinated by genealogy? Well, hip hip hooray, let's talk DNA with Julie.
The truth is in your genes.
In CutOff Genes.
Welcome to CutOff Genes, the podcast that helps you find your truth using nothing but DNA and elevates the voices of adoptees who are misrepresented in the public narrative about adoption. I'm Julie Dixon Jackson, a domestic infant adoptee and NPE, as well as a genetic genealogist, henceforth known as a Gen Genie.
And I am Renee Colbert, the co-host who is representing the village idiot of the community. Thrilled to be back. I missed you so much last time.
I missed you too. Welcome back.
But we got our sweet lily bug. I gotta
We
say,
did.
there are no two people I love. Well, your whole family. There's no one I love more in this world. Please don't tell my family about this.
Yeah, don't
than me
tell
and my
them.
family.
Yeah,
Okay.
thank you. We appreciate that. We appreciate the love, Renee. Hey, is my boy gonna be dog sitting for you?
He sure is. I'm telling this is why I love your family, is because you help me out on every facet of my life. Now we're back to my family. My brother and sister-in-law are going to be in Vegas for like a business trip, but they're bringing my 12-year-old nephew, who I'm
Oh my gosh, he's
obsessed
12
with.
now. Oh my gosh, I forget how
know.
time moves.
I know. But wouldn't you know that Vegas didn't look too kindly at
12-year-olds?
yeah. So Aunt Nay's going out to hang out with the 12-year-old while they do the business.
Oh,
Right.
fun.
But we're now hitting the point where he's more mature than I am.
Sure.
So I'm like, we're going to circus. And he's like, I mean, we could, I guess.
Have
So
you
we'll see.
been to Circus lately? Is it open still?
Not lately. I think it's still the
Oh my
petri dish of germs
gosh.
that it's always
It's
been.
so gross.
Yeah, real
Yeah,
bad.
I
Real
mean,
bad.
last time I was there was what, 15 years ago, I guess, when the
Sure.
kids were little. And it was
Honestly,
like,
same.
that was also my last time on a roller coaster.
Do you do New York? Is that the
No, there's
Circus
one
one?
at
Oh, yeah.
Circus, and it is
Okay.
rickety as hell, and it hurt my body to ride. And I was like, so I don't really know if it's because it was rickety or if I just
Sure.
can't do roller coasters anymore.
Okay.
But I remember, like, every time we go around a corner, I'd be like, "Oh,
No, thank you.
Yeah.
But your perfect kid came over and is gonna watch this little monster of mine for the weekend. So Beckett Boy is gonna come hang out with Tugboat, and you better believe Tugboat recognized him immediately. He was just like,
Did
my
he?
guy.
Are you
He was
serious?
just smiling ear to ear.
It was so funny because
the
I
best.
asked him. I said, "So did Tugboat get up on the table?" Because I know Tugboat
Right.
as a
Mhm.
dog who gets on tables, and
Mhm.
he's like, "No, he was actually much lower energy than I remember."
He's 7.5 now. I know.
Oh my God. I don't know what to
I
do with that
know.
information either.
I know. But Becca just rolled because Tugboat is the most like love it, great suggestion. We will be playing by my rules kind of dog. Like he's
Yeah.
appeasable. He'll hear you out, but he's like,
Yeah.
that was a great idea, but I won't be doing that. Thank you. And so I moved specifically to give him a backyard, and I was like trying to teach him fetch, and he was just like, there is no reward in this.
Oh, no.
I would love
Yes,
to,
exactly.
but I can't. So Julie, he has trained me to take a bag of treats to the backyard, and then I just throw that. And he's like, now that I can work with. That's
Oh
an
my
incentive. So
gosh.
then he just run and gets treats. So that's how we get the dog to move around.
Oh, I just visualized you just throwing the entire bag of treats and just letting him have at it.
That's it, like fish food.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right. Hey, for today's episode, I'm going to start with a trenches story. So here's what happened, everybody. So I was contacted last week by a woman who called me directly at home, and she found my website through a series of weird things that she felt was God sent. And she sounded
Aw.
distraught.
Oh,
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. It was like she
Okay.
sounded really fragile and a bit distraught. And she was
Yeah.
kind of babbling, and she just needed help, and she didn't have any money, and she was blah, blah, blah. So I said, what, just trying to calm her down. I said, who are you looking for? And she said, me. And I was intrigued by that. So I'm like,
Anyone would?
do
Okay.
tell.
Right.
Right. So
I think I found her.
Yes.
Quickest case I've ever
here
worked
you
on.
are. So I said, tell me more.
Yeah.
What do we mean by that? And she told me that she was sure that her parents were not her biological parents, even
Okay.
though they'd never told her that, and went as far as to saying that she believed she had been kidnapped as a baby. She even gave the
Oh
names
boy.
of the people she believed to be her parents.
Okay.
So she
Okay.
had been for years. She has believed that she is not their child, and a lot of the evidence she gave, though anecdotal, was compelling. For instance, she
Hmm.
said that there were no baby pictures of her, except her mother had come up with a hospital newborn photo and said that it was her, but there was a blue background, which means it's
Okay.
which in hospitals they'll give girls a pink background, especially
Sure.
back when
Okay.
she was born. Um, and her mother swore it was her, but she said later she discovered the photo in a trash can and had a different name on
Mm.
the back. I'm like, well, now
Ooh,
that's interesting, isn't it?
this is
Yes. And so then
very
she made me
riveting.
send her an email saying that I wouldn't share whatever discovery I made publicly because her parents were still living. She was very nervous about sharing anything with me, but which is not going to be helpful because how else can I help you? But so I did send her an
Yeah.
email saying I wouldn't, there's nothing but anonymity here. Even though I'm telling this story, obviously this is a story that happened. I'm not identifying any people or locations. So
Sure.
this is my story
Okay.
to tell as long as, you
Okay.
know, anywho. So I agreed to help her. And I just needed access to her DNA matches and, you know, just started to build a tree based on her DNA
Right.
matches. It was pretty evident pretty quickly that she is actually related to the family she was raised with. She told me the name of her parents that raised her, but she knew
Yeah.
very little about their origins. She didn't know her grandparents' names. She didn't know it sounds like a really sad family situation actually
Okay.
because they
Okay.
didn't
Okay.
sound great. She said they were always very secretive. And so whatever she gave me, I started building out, and I also, with the help of the matches, was able to build out the tree pretty quickly. And it was quite evident that she is related to her parents. The only weirdness could be that I could not, while there are lots of matches that appear to be directly related to her mother, I couldn't point out where in like high matches. But her mother also has a name that I have a feeling she's changed over the years, and that wasn't the name that she was
Mm.
born with, her first name. So yes,
Interesting.
and she did
Okay.
mention that her mother has changed her name, like moved so much and changed her name over the years.
Is the DNA shaken out that you can tell that her parents are directly her parents or they're just related?
Um, her father is definitely her father.
Okay.
And her mother, the easiest way to know that her mother is that she has a half sibling from
Oh,
another marriage that is a match to
okay.
her. And which I
Okay.
thought was
Okay.
interesting because when I pointed that out to her, I said, "Do you know your half sibling?" And she goes, "Oh yeah, I know some of them." I'm like, "Well, one of them is one of your DNA matches. It's such and
Yeah.
such a person." She says, "Yeah, but it could also be the person that she thought was her biological mother's other daughter." And I'm like, well, this is a
Sure.
man. And the name is right
Sure.
there, which is the name of your half sibling. So,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? I feel like she
Yeah.
has this really expanded version of confirmation bias to where
Right.
she'd come up
Right.
with these people like so when I disclosed this information with her, she sounded disappointed. Instead of giving her peace of mind, I think the weight of what she'd believed for so long being incorrect felt like a blow to her.
Yeah.
Um,
Of course. Of course it did.
yeah,
Yeah.
the family that she thought was
Yeah.
hers had been on her radar for quite some time. She'd come across this story of a kidnapped baby that was actually born 2.5 years after her birth date of record. So that's a a stretch, an age difference. And but she convinced herself that looking at these people's faces was like looking into a mirror. And
Mm.
this is a
Mm.
common mistake for
Yeah.
seekers. Like for years, when I was looking, I would come up with a scenario using scant evidence and photos, thinking that I could see me in the faces of strangers. But that's confirmation bias. And it was like just because I
Yeah.
had nothing to work with, I
Yep.
just, you know. So then she said to me, that she asked me why the surname of the purported father of the kidnapped child was in the DNA. And what she
Mhm.
meant was that there was a tree of a very distant match, and that name appeared in the tree way up there, and it's a
Okay.
really distant match. She had found this and used her confirmation bias to say, there it is, there's the name,
Right.
all the while ignoring the multiple close matches that had both of her parents' names. And she'd said this earlier to me before I took the case, and I tried to correct her on that that's not a thing. But she said, "Oh, remember, I've had 2 blood transfusions. And
Uh-huh.
so, your DNA can change with blood transfusions." No, your DNA cannot change with blood transfusion. She said she found a story of this happening to one person, which again is anecdotal. The
Sweetheart.
fact
Yeah.
is,
Yeah.
DNA does not change with blood transfusions. The only thing that can change your DNA is a bone marrow or stem cell transplant.
Mm.
And even then, that wouldn't explain her direct matches to both of her parents' relatives.
Sure.
So,
Yeah, that's a tough one to get around. Yeah.
yes,
Okay.
yes. So, in the
Okay.
long run, I hope that gives her comfort. I think it was wishful thinking because her family doesn't sound awesome.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and I'm glad I could help her. At first I was like put off by how argumentative she was with the facts, but what are you going to do? So, the reason I told that story is because I have something to share publicly. And it's a little bit heavy.
But
And this already. This is my first time telling the listeners, and I had to get permission from my husband to tell this because it is his story to tell. And unlike me, he's a very private person, but he allowed me to share this information because it kind of relates to the podcast and to what we do and what I do in many ways. And I thought it was a really relevant thing to talk about. And I also want the listeners to know what's going on in my life. My husband, Lucky Jackson, has been recently diagnosed with leukemia. It's actually acute myeloid leukemia. And the acute part is really not there yet. What he really has is he has MDS, which leads to acute leukemia. And when he saw the oncologist, he said, "You don't have acute leukemia today, but you might have it next week, and you're
mm,
going to have it." So, MDS is a group of disorders that happen when the bone marrow doesn't make enough healthy blood cells. These flawed cells, or blasts is what they're called, don't work. Instead, they take up space in the bone marrow or blood, leaving less room for healthy blood cells and platelets to grow. Kudos to my husband because he knew something was wrong about a year ago. And because he is very proactive with his own health care, eats very healthily. He really pays attention to his labs, and he noticed that his white blood cell count was getting lower and lower,
wow.
and brought it to the attention of his doctors. And as it kept getting lower, then he got sent to the oncologist, and it still got lower. And so he finally had a bone marrow biopsy, and what they found was 5 alleles in his DNA that have mutated during his lifetime,
Okay.
meaning they are not inherited alleles or
Right.
mutations. Like so it's probably something that was brought on by um, any number of things in his everyday life, possibly stress, probably stress, I would say, especially with the last 6 or 7 years we've had, has been very stressful for our family. There's no saying why.
Sure.
Anyway, but he is pretty much symptom free. He doesn't have he still clots. He doesn't have bone pain. He's tired. He's more tired than usual, but they confirmed very quickly that he is a perfect candidate for a bone marrow transplant.
Amazing.
So he's now on they are now searching for a match, a perfect bone marrow match. Um, and until that happens, he's on 2 different kinds of chemo. He just finished his first week of chemo, which is not traditional chemo. It's injections. 5 days a week, 5 consecutive days a week, he gets these injections, and then he has 3 weeks off, and then he goes through another cycle. He also has some pills, this is a specific cocktail for what he has, that he has not started yet because they are cost prohibitive, incredibly expensive, and also very difficult to get. And they haven't been able to get their hands on them yet, which is a little concerning. But he has great doctors at UCLA, and it's just a matter. We're seeing his oncologist this afternoon, so
Amazing.
we'll see what's going on with that. But he has tolerated this first round very well. He just had a little bit of skin irritation in some of the injection sites,
Okay.
to where it kind of feels like a sunburn
Gotcha.
and is
Okay.
like a kind of a welt. But he's fine. That is the worst that has happened. He's in good spirits. He's very much a fighter, very much treats everything in life like a project and likes to be the best at everything. So he's going to obviously win this fight. And we're just there. We're just there for it. And to support and let him lead the way. And yeah, that's where we are.
I love that. I love you so much.
Mhm.
I've never known Lucky to not win a game. So we all know how this ends. He wins.
Yes.
He
And
wins.
his name is
He
Lucky,
absolutely
for
wins.
heaven's sake.
Come on. It's right there in the name. How are you feeling? I would love to like represent the listener and ask questions about how you're doing, but we can also be like, it's still a little tender. It's
No,
still a little
no,
new. So I'll
we've
let you know as
processed quite a lot.
okay.
Like I'm taking the lead from him. Yeah, it's like every time I see him, I'm like, "How you feeling? How are
Yeah.
you? Is everything okay?"
Yeah.
And he is great, and I'm very hopeful because he's so young and the perfect candidate for a bone marrow transplant. The most dangerous thing is if you have as a bone marrow transplant in and of itself can kill you, especially if you have comorbidities. But he is healthy as a horse.
There you go. There you go.
And he is, he's like, let's do it. Let's do it now. We're doing it.
Yes.
And that,
Yes.
when it comes to that, it could be anywhere from 3 to 6 months. They have to find a donor.
Okay.
And
Can an alive person give bone marrow?
yes, it is. It has to come from an alive person, actually.
Can I see if I can?
Okay,
What is
that's the next thing I want to talk about. So of
Yeah.
course, immediately everybody is like, "Oh, I'm going to go test. I'm going to
I'll do
go."
it.
So
Yeah.
there is a organization called NMDP, the National Marrow Donor Program, and Be the Match. And it is here's the problem. Several friends have immediately gone there to test to see if they are a match, but they will not take just random tests from anybody over, I think it's 40 years old. It's 35 or 40
Oh.
years old, because young bone marrow is what is desirable.
That's where it's at. Okay.
Yes.
All right.
If it comes to a point where they can't find a match, then they will start target testing family first, and then friends can test. At that
Okay.
point, you can be. And we are thinking, hoping, fingers crossed, that we won't need to. The fact that he is 100% European is very encouraging, because he is
Nice.
more likely to find a match than
Sure.
a less, I guess, less populated demographic for donors, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's a
Yeah.
sentence, but whatever. Um,
I tracked it.
So thank you. And what's interesting? Okay, couple interesting things as it pertains to us is
DNA.
that. So do you remember in the 90s, there was a little girl who had leukemia and they couldn't find a match for her.
Hmm.
And her
Yeah.
parents ended up having another child who ended
Yes.
up
Yes. Yes.
being
Yes. That's
the
how they
perfect
ultimately.
match.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it saved her life because she
Yeah.
became the donor. So, the most ideal potential donor for bone marrow is a full sibling. My husband does not have full siblings. The irony is not lost on me. His half siblings will be the first ones to be tested, and our kids, if
Okay.
and maybe his mom, if they can't find a match. But I think it's just to kind of step off to the side here. To me, that's like another reason to not to have more than one kid.
Sure. Sure.
And
I love it.
another reason that it's important to know who you're related to. And
Always helps.
yes,
Yeah.
yes, these are I mean, the health issues are the health issues are really for people who don't think you should find your biological family. That is usually the only thing they will bend on. They'll be like, "Ah, DNA doesn't matter. It doesn't matter who you're related
Sure.
to," because that's just their conditioned
Sure.
thinking.
And that's fine.
But
Yeah.
and that's fine. But it's a real issue when it comes
Yeah.
to health issues. Also, the second one that is legit is that my husband's DNA is going to change. Mhm.
Whoa. Oh yeah,
So,
because you just
yeah,
that's oh man, you're so good at
see
storytelling.
what I
My
did
God.
there?
Okay, I see it.
So, yes, there. Whenever somebody goes into the Facebook groups and says, "Oh my God, my father is not matching me. He took a DNA test and he's not my father." And the first
Right.
thing that people who are in the know will say, "Has he had a bone marrow transplant?"
Mhm.
Because that is the only thing that would explain that if they are your father or a stem cell transplant.
There you go.
And even that is kind of wishy-washy too.
Yeah.
Like
It's
it
not
can change.
consistent.
My husband actually contacted 23andMe and like did a thing the saying, so I had a bone marrow transplant. Can I take a DNA test? And they're like, nope, you cannot because
Really.
it will not be accurate. Let
Oh,
me
that's
see.
fascinating.
Here is
Yeah, while you look that up, I'm going to giggle with the listeners that I was like, "Yeah, Julie, you know, it's the funniest thing. I just heard about a woman who thought a blood transfusion could change your DNA." But I was like, oh, it was you 10 minutes ago. Good God.
that's funny.
Lord in heaven.
So there are a series of different kind of answers when you're asked, does a bone marrow transplant change your DNA? And the most
Mhm.
common answer is you will now have you will have your original DNA and you will have the DNA of your match.
Wow.
When it comes to blood, if you have a blood test, the DNA of your donor will be their donor. In genetic genealogy or in direct to consumer testing, it's a saliva test or actually cells from the inside of your cheek, which is
Okay.
not a blood test. So it's not clear to me whether it would just be a mixture of the two DNAs and be
Yeah.
completely inconclusive, or maybe it won't change if it's not from the blood. I'm not real sure. And I'm trying
Mm.
to get a straight answer on this because this is what I do. But it's
Yeah.
still, maybe because it's so new, there still hasn't been enough research to say for sure if you are going to match the other person, if it's going to be
Possibly.
that person's DNA or the mixture of the two or your DNA.
Right.
So
Your listeners are going to want to know what they can do to help, what you need, how we can best support you guys as
you
you
know
go through
what?
it.
The best thing to do is please don't reach out to my husband directly. As I said, he's very private. You can feel free to put well wishes on the Facebook group, whatever, prayers, whatever you do. I believe in karma. My husband's a very good person.
Yes.
A white light, just positive stuff. He's got this.
Yes.
We
Yeah.
appreciate the thoughts. If it comes down to not being able to find a donor, absolutely, I will request. If you happen to be a listener who is under 40, I don't think I have too many of those. But if you,
But they may know people. People
yes,
know people.
sure.
Yeah.
If you happen to be a listener under 40 or know somebody who would like to donate to be the match, uh, feel free to do that. I would love that. We would like to help as many people as we possibly can. I'm sure after this is all over, my husband is going to be an advocate for this and be able to talk on this extensively. And he's probably found a new passion in life, just like I did.
Yeah. I
Um,
love it.
so yes,
I
so
love
thank
it.
you so much for the well wishes and the good, happy thoughts. And we're looking at this as it kind of just gives us new perspective and
Yeah.
reminds us what is important and what is not
Mm,
in life.
beautiful. And when you're going through something like this, when you're going through something where you're like, I'm going to win this game,
Mm.
what what do you find most helpful as far as like friends being supportive? Like text being like, "How are you?" or being distracted, or what's the best way to
None
sort
of
of
those. I
provide?
distract myself as
Yeah.
much as possible. And right now, and I'm working, which thank
Yeah.
God I am because I need that distraction
Yeah.
and the podcast and hanging out with friends. I do have an email chain, not an email chain, a text chain that I think you are on that I'm
Yeah.
giving
I made the
updates to people. Um, so, and I don't know if people, I guess I could do updates just in the Facebook group, the private
Yeah.
Facebook group. I don't want to do it publicly in Facebook because my husband doesn't want that.
That's okay.
But
Yeah.
I can give updates as of now. Things are not going to really get I mean, they're real. He's doing chemo
Of
as we
course.
speak.
Of course.
And like I said, they anticipated 3 to 6 months before the bone marrow transplant. That
Okay.
in and of itself is going to be an adventure. He's going to be in the hospital for quite a while, I believe. And what happens? It's an infusion, and
Sure.
then they just monitor the heck out of him um, to make sure he doesn't get any infections, and to make sure that it what's it called grafts, it's
Yeah.
engrafting, I guess is what it's
Yeah.
called, so that your body doesn't reject it. And that is a kind of like, we wait and see what happens. And
Yeah.
we're just gonna, so we are holding tight right now. He's doing the chemo because what this chemo is going to do is really like knock down his immune system. Um,
Sure.
I guess, to get him to zero. And so we have
Yeah.
to be very careful about. Okay, if anybody lives in LA and knows a really good, reliable handyman,
There we go. Great.
we
Great.
live in a 100-year-old house,
Yeah.
and I'm sure there's mold. I know there's rats under the house. I know
Of
all of these
course.
things. So there are
Yeah.
certain things that I would like to get ready for having a more sterile house.
Yeah.
And so
Great.
I'm going to need to bring somebody in who can do little fixes for us, like regrouting
Perfect.
and closing off uh, holes that may go under the house, and
Perfect.
remediating possible mold and what have you. So that is
Great.
something we've not had our house professionally cleaned since COVID, and everybody
Okay.
knows that I'm not good at cleaning.
No creative is.
Yeah.
No creative is. Yeah.
So
Yeah. This is my
yeah.
last question is
Mm.
when you go through something like this, are you the type of person who likes anecdotal stories of success? If it was like, I knew this uncle of mine had the exact same thing and he was great,
N
or
I
what's most
I think
helpful?
maybe my husband is, I'm not really,
Yeah.
because I
Yeah.
already know all that. I
Sure.
mean, I know
Yeah, that's fair.
the first thing I did was look to see if that girl from the '90s was still alive,
Yeah.
and she is indeed still alive and thriving.
Love it.
We're gonna win this, and thank you all for listening, and let's take a break. If you're enjoying Cut Off Jeans, please subscribe, rate, and review wherever you listen to your podcasts.
Coffee.
All
Okay.
right, here's something I just happened upon the other day.
Ready?
And this was on CBS News. They're doing a whole thing about this, and something that I didn't know, which is a little disturbing. So from CBS News, genealogy companies like Ancestry.com and 23andMe have to get your permission before they store, use, or share your DNA under the Genetic Information Privacy Act. However, the California Department of Public Health doesn't have to. In fact, the agency has been storing DNA samples for every baby born in California since the 1980s. Researchers can purchase those samples for state approved studies, and law enforcement can access them with a court order. But state agency officials refuse to provide CBS News California with a list of recent law enforcement and research requests for newborn blood spots. After more than a decade of CBS reporting on the biobank, this is the first time California officials have refused to reveal to us who has access to California's newborn blood spots. Under previous administrations, the agency regularly provided that information under the California Public Records Act. Keep in mind that if you're even related to someone born in California since 1983, thanks to genetic genealogy, portions of your DNA are in the biobank too and can likely be used to identify you. I don't know. I'm taking
Oh,
pause as to whether that part is true. This is just one article, and I'd need to look into it more.
okay. Wait,
But
is this from CBS News or this is a?
yes, well, this is a
Oh,
story related to CBS News. So this is like
got
from
it. Got it.
probably from the website. Now, so I have had two children in California, and I don't ever remember being told
Mm,
that their DNA would be stored in California.
interesting.
In fact, it
Interesting.
says many parents don't know the state is collecting newborn DNA.
There we go.
California has amassed what's believed to be the largest stockpile of newborn blood spots in the country. Okay, so the blood spots thing rang a bell to me, and I was like, why do I know that though? So when I was a birth certificate clerk at Hoag Hospital Presbyterian in Newport
Mhm.
Beach in 1986, um, I remember because I would make the birth certificates. How's that for irony? For newborn babies in that hospital. And
Right.
sometimes I could go to their charts and to get information I needed for the health department.
Yeah.
And there was always little blood spots. They would like
Yeah.
prick their heel and get some of the blood and put it on a piece of paper.
Mm,
And that
mhm.
apparently is what stays in the repository. For some, newborn DNA testing is a lifesaver. It tells the story of this little baby called Ronnie. And a couple of days after taking him home, his parents got a call from a local pediatrician who said that the baby was diagnosed with no immune system at all. They learned Ronnie's
That's funny.
heel prick revealed that he had a rare genetic disorder called SCID, also known as bubble boy disease.
Oh boy.
Remember Bubble
Okay.
Boy? Remember the boy in the
I
plastic bubble?
do.
After David
I
Vedder, who
do.
lived his life in a bubble in the 70s before dying at age 12. Ronnie's first infection could have killed him, but thanks to the research, the disease is no longer a death sentence. Ronnie was rushed to UCSF Medical Center where he received life saving gene therapy, probably some kind of a transplant. That's where he met Dr. Jennifer Puck, who created the test that saved Ronnie's life.
All right. That makes
So
sense.
I guess the argument is there needs to be informed consent
Yeah.
if they
Makes
are
sense.
keeping it, and people need to be able to opt out, I guess. Remember when I was having my kids, there was a huge push for the cord blood, cord blood, whatever it's called, like keeping you the blood they collect from the umbilical cord, like
Right.
keeping
Yeah.
it and storing it somewhere in case
Yeah.
they need it for some kind of
Yeah.
gene therapy later.
Right.
Because there is oh, that's interesting.
Let's hear
There are
it.
two different kinds of bone marrow transplantation. I'm gonna do it in layman's terms, which is probably for the best for everybody.
Okay.
You can either use your own bone marrow, your own good marrow, and it would be much easier for you. And maybe they get that from the cord blood that was stored,
Yes.
or
Okay.
and that is less common, but probably a better match, I would say.
Yeah.
And then, of course, using the bone marrow from donors. Um,
Look at that.
so
Okay.
that's the two different kinds. And I would think that, well, if you're going to use your own bone marrow, they probably would have used, they would probably get that and what's the word? Harvest it? Is that a thing?
Sounds right.
Harvest it for harvest it into good bone marrow. I'm totally spitballing here.
It
But I
all
think
listen,
that's probably
all
what
makes
it
sense to
is.
me.
Yes, and
Yeah,
we
that's
use your
fascinating.
that's and that to me would be a great reason for uh storing your own cord blood, your children's
Yeah,
cord blood.
yeah. That's
Yeah.
and is it the type of somebody needs to store it for you, or you can toss that in with the little
No,
Haagen Dazs?
it needs to be done, which
Okay,
is why a lot of
okay.
people didn't do it because it was quite expensive. Anyway, I'm going to keep on top of this and see if we get any more information on it. Hi, Gen Genies. If you are enjoying Cutoff Genes, why not consider becoming a Patreon subscriber? Patreon is a site where listeners can pledge a small monthly amount, either $5 or $10 or whatever you want, to support the cost of bringing you your favorite podcast. All patrons get early access to new Cutoff Genes episodes before they're released to the public, as well as bonus content, including video outtakes, blog posts, and insider information that is not available to the general public. I love bringing you the Cut Off Jeans podcast, and it would mean so much if you would consider supporting this labor of love. Just go to patreon.com/Cut Off Jeans podcast. It is story time. This week, I had a conversation. This is the first part, obviously, of a two-part conversation I had with Crystal Park, who is a Canadian adoptee and the subject of a new documentary called Because She's Adopted. And I found her on TikTok, and she is a really interesting and something just anecdotally for you and me and anybody who knows musical theater. You know Stephanie J. Block, right, Renee?
Oh yeah, yeah. I do.
Crystal is a dead ringer for Stephanie J. Block.
Whoa,
It was the
cool.
weirdest thing. I'll show you a picture of her later.
Yeah.
But when I was talking to her, I asked her. I said, "Do you know Stephanie J. Block by chance?" She's like, "No." So I said, "Google her right now," and she found her, and she was like, "Oh my god, they could be twins."
Wow.
Or maybe she could be
Maybe.
Stephanie's slightly younger sister. I don't know.
Okay.
But they
Either way.
really, really look alike. And of course, I immediately looked into what Stephanie's heritage was. And
Sure.
they're
Are they?
they're
Are they sisters?
likely not related. Well, let's listen to the first part of my conversation with Crystal Park. Hi, everybody. I have on the line adoptee and filmmaker Crystal Park from Canada. Hi, Crystal.
Hi, Jules. How are you?
I'm so good. I just watched your film Because She's Adopted. Thank you so much for the link because it's not
Yeah.
for public consumption yet. And I have so much I want to talk about.
I'm ready.
It was just what a great piece to have out there for all adoptees, by the way, and also for all people that are of Native nations,
Yeah, thank
and
you.
we'll get into that. Before we get into it, I'd like to know how it came about, how this filming came about. What was
Yeah.
the impetus for it?
Yeah. So it's funny. I just realized that I was an NPE last week.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, we have like the double whammy there.
It's funny. I discovered my biological father in 2021
Mm-hmm.
after thinking that this other guy was my father for 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just last week that I realized that there's a name for that.
Indeed.
I'd heard it going around in the adoptee community, but didn't think that it was me.
It
So I guess
applied.
I guess I'm part of the club now.
Yes, you
Um,
are. You're the golden ticket, I guess. Yeah,
yeah, I
I
guess.
had a very
Yeah.
similar situation, except after I found my not my dad, I call him
Yeah.
not my dad.
Yeah.
I traveled to Australia and met him and his whole family and did the genealogy
Wow.
of the whole family and took his DNA while I was there. And after I returned, thinking I had completed the story,
Yeah.
I got a little surprise, and it wasn't him. I had to wait another couple
Oh my
years.
goodness.
Crazy,
Did it
crazy.
Nothing was the same after that
Mhm.
for me. And it was, I joke about joining the club, but it truly was one of the most shocking and life-changing experiences for
Yeah.
me. I'm so grateful for it though, because it lit a fire inside of me. And from that point forward, I just wanted to share my story because I thought, there's got to be other people out there that have experienced something similar.
Mhm.
And then, when I met my birth mother when I was 17, her boyfriend had recorded our whole meeting and, and our whole weekend together back in 2001, I guess that was.
Mhm.
So I thought, I had that footage. And then what if we captured, me meeting my biological father? We'd have that footage.
Mhm.
And that was sort of how it was birthed. And I had, three very strong women in my life at the time that just said, "You want to make a documentary? Let's do it." Like just go ahead and do it. This can happen. So, yeah, so that's how it all kind of came about.
How did you do? Is the director a friend of yours?
No, so a dear friend of mine who's an artist had done a few paintings of me.
Mm.
And he was at her house on working on some other project, and he had saw the painting of me and he was really intrigued by it and asked about my
Oh,
story. And so it was that night that I called my girlfriend and said, "Hey, I think I want to do a documentary." She said, "Well, I just actually had a documentarian at my house today and he saw your painting and he's really interested in your story. So let me give you his number." And so I
crazy.
called him up. It was just honestly, everything felt so like it was all really meant
Kismet.
to be.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. I think that
Yeah.
happens to a lot of adoptees, especially those of us who are seekers, that
Yeah.
I think we are, I think we kind of manifest things. I think we're pattern recognizers
Yeah.
and, just because there are way too many uh coincidences in my life, way more than the average person, and I think it's just because I am more aware.
Yeah.
You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
I
I
I
think that's
totally
something we
do.
have. Yeah.
Yeah. It's our superpower.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, yeah. So, I was not a filmmaker. I was, like I said, I was a hairdresser. I worked in addictions. I was a stay-at-home mom for many, many years. I have three teenage kids now. And, so me and the director met first, and then we brought my husband into the meeting and told him. And my husband said, Okay, this is another one of your ideas. Let's see
Uh-huh.
if this like comes to fruition. But he, like a good little husband, he supports me in everything I do. And yeah, he supported me to create this thing.
Mhm.
And it was um absolutely life-changing for
I
me.
bet. I bet.
Yeah. Yeah.
Kudos. That you
Thank you.
must feel so accomplished.
I do. I will tell you though, like I really it's a strange place to be now because I've created this film that documented, a majority of like a 2-year period within my life.
Mhm.
And looking back on that now, I was coming out of the fog through that film.
Yep.
And I didn't really see that until just recently. I thought I had already kind of come out of the fog, but I think I was only partially out.
Yeah.
And so now looking back on it, there's things that I probably wouldn't have said the same way. There's
Mm.
things that I probably would have edited maybe differently.
Hmm.
Um, and because, for instance, okay,
Mhm.
there's a part in there where I say, I think adoption's beautiful, but
I that
did you hear
totally struck
that?
me when you said that.
Yeah.
I was like,
You're like,
okay,
"Ugh, I hate
okay.
her."
No, you're allowed to say that. But it absolutely struck me when you did say it.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. And then I say, but I think there's a very painful side to adoption.
Mhm.
And, looking back on that now, I wasn't saying adoption's beautiful because, our names and our identities are
Yeah.
changed and we're lied to and all of these things. So, but it's just one of those things. And now I'm all on like connected to all these adoptee groups online, and everyone's like,
Adoption's not beautiful.
stop saying adoption's beautiful. I'm like, oh no. I'm
Oh.
like in my bed losing sleep
Yeah,
over
okay,
it, right?
so little
So,
advice for you there. The, adoptee TikTok is wrought with trauma, and
yeah.
there's often a lot of infighting just because people are
Yeah.
so raw and want
Yeah.
and want themselves to be heard at all costs, which I understand absolutely.
Yeah.
But I
Yeah.
had to step back from it, from participating in a lot of it because it was too hard for me to have my own feelings about things without being
Yeah.
attacked by somebody that is in the same position as me but has a different approach to it. Yeah.
Yes. Yes. Absolutely. It's a frightening place.
Mhm.
For me, I never want to hurt anybody. That is never my intention. But I also have realized, even in making the documentary, that people's feelings, like my intention, as long as my intentions are good, and I
Yes.
mean, I have to lay my head down on my own pillow and live with myself,
Mhm.
right? But I think that I was maybe overprotective of some of the people in my
Mhm.
life, because I didn't want to hurt them. But that came at the expense of me not being able to
Yep.
fully
Mhm.
share
Yes.
everything,
Yes.
right?
And you
Um,
will be attacked relentlessly for it, by the way. Even
yeah,
though I think you were very, very respectful to your parents,
yeah,
but on a daily basis, I hear from people saying, talking about
mm,
my trauma is disrespecting the memory of my parents. And it's just not
yeah,
because they're two different
yeah.
things.
A hundred
Yeah.
percent, a hundred
Yeah.
percent, yeah. And I'm over betraying and abandoning myself for other
Yep.
people. I'm just over it. I'm not here to do that anymore. Um I did that for many, many years, with people pleasing and all the rest of it. And so, um my intention was always to do, it's funny, I was going to do a podcast, and I was going to do, first I was going to do a book, and then a
Hmm.
podcast, and then a
Hmm.
documentary, and it all kind of happened the opposite way. So I did the documentary. I have a 6-part limited series podcast coming out
Oh,
in the
good.
fall. It's because she's adopted
Hmm.
podcast. And then I've been working on the book, and I think the book is, I'm just going to write it no holds
Yeah.
bar, and then I'm going to go back
You have
and
to. You
decide,
have to. You
you
have
know?
to allow your I'm in the middle of that too. And
Yeah.
what keeps uh blocking me is that the thought that, oh, I can't say that. I can't say that. But you realize, but you're not publishing that. You're just saying
Yes.
that because you're speaking 100% your truth. Then you can go
Yes.
back and find a different way to say it without, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
with you on that.
Yeah.
It's daunting to say the least.
When I first went into like Adoptee Land
Hmm.
online, I thought, "Oh my gosh, what is wrong with me? Why, like, should I be hating my adoptive
Hmm.
parents? Should I hate my biological mother? Like, why? Like, I thought that I was doing it
Mhm.
wrong,
Mhm.
but I slowly learned that it's just, my journey is my
Mhm.
journey, your journey is your journey. If you want to be angry, you go ahead and be angry until you don't need to be angry anymore. And um, if you want to be okay with your adoption, then you be okay with your
Right.
adoption too.
Right. Make
Like,
your own
we all
content.
are on our own.
Yeah.
Totally,
Yeah.
totally, totally. So, yeah. How have you dealt the the just volatility coming back at
Um,
you?
it's been I have to step back a lot. I am very much it's it's I'm very much in it. Like all aspects of my life for the past 6 years have been this. Um
Yeah.
Mainly because, and you'll understand if you listen to the other parts of the podcast, but
Mhm.
I was out of the fog. Having my daughter kind of put me out of the fog. I'm sure you probably can relate to that. Um,
Yeah.
but then something happened within my adoptive family that was so traumatizing in 2016,
Mm.
that, and a direct attack on me that changed the course of my life, um, in a legal sense, that I had PTSD from it. I have PTSD from it, and that's what started the podcast. Certainly, because I had to do something. I had to somehow make lemonade. Uh, but the listeners will notice that when I first started the podcast, it was about genetic genealogy because I'm a genetic genealogist.
Yeah.
And it was about teaching people how to use DNA to find their families and how it works and all that stuff, as well as highlighting my story and my adoption story and other adoptee stories. It is kind of flipped a little. Like, I still talk about DNA, absolutely, because it's still my passion.
Yeah.
But my goal now is to elevate our voices because it's just not happening. And the more of us that do that, the more it's going to eventually and slowly but surely, I hope, change the accepted narrative of what it is to be adopted and what adoption means
Mm.
to people in their lives.
I so appreciate you.
No.
I appreciate every single person that's
Hmm.
out there doing what they're doing. It really is important
Hmm.
work. Um, and you really put yourself out there to be criticized. But also, to me, I can't think of a more vulnerable part of myself than the adoptee
Yeah.
part. People don't realize the vulnerability and the depth of
Hmm.
pain and trauma
Hmm.
that is attached to that, and going into that and sharing that kind of work. It can be quite exhausting,
Absolutely. Absolutely.
but it's worth it, so thank you, like, sincerely, sincerely, Jules, like, thank you. And even just from the short bit that I've listened to, you do it with so much levity, which I
Oh,
appreciate, because I just, like, I mean, you probably saw in the film, I'm a big goofball. I never realized I was like that.
it's great though. It's so great, and you're so natural on camera without being stiff or posy or over the top.
Mm,
I think
thank
you're a
you.
great, and I think you're a great spokesperson for us. I want to get into the more about in the film, but I have a couple
Sure.
questions first because I was wondering.
Yeah.
Um, I noticed in a lot of the shots there were flag poles, and in almost every single one of them, the flags were at half mast. Why is
Yes.
that?
Wow. I just got chills that you
Really?
recognized
I always
that. Oh
notice
my
flags that are half
gosh.
mast.
Wow. Okay, so that was
Hmm.
2021 when, at the Kamloops Residential School here in British Columbia, Canada, they had discovered 212 unmarked graves of
Right.
children. So there was finally um, a chance for Indigenous people to be heard and to be
Mm.
seen after years and years of trying to tell their stories and nobody listening. So I just, that was such a impactful summer for me to go on this journey, and very
Mm-hmm.
emotional, very, very
Mm-hmm.
emotional. So,
Yeah. Oh,
yeah.
interesting. Interesting. Yeah.
Mhm.
It is weird that I noticed that. But I
Yeah.
do. Almost
Yes.
when I'm driving around, if I see something at half mast, I immediately think who died, you know. So,
Yeah.
wow,
Yeah.
that's fascinating. You talk about a lot of the film is about the fact that you are part of the Cree Nation, yes?
Mhm. Yes.
And a lot of it is about what happened in Canada, what's called the 60s scoop,
Yep.
and
Yes.
which is different, listeners, than the baby scoop era. The baby scoop era was
Yeah.
what most of us went through, what, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, and some of the 80s. But the 60s scoop was specifically something that was, I mean, I'm sure a form of it happened in the US as well, obviously. But why don't you tell us a little about that?
Mhm. Yeah, so as in the residential school um system, the government had created that to assimilate indigenous children into white culture, and in their words, take the Indian out of the child. The 60s scoop was just another branch of that intentional cultural
Yeah.
genocide. And so they would literally take children off of the reserves, steal them off of the reserves, and they would post their pictures in the papers, like as if they were puppy dogs. And they would adopt these children out. There was uh, programs that were doing this, and so my biological mother was a 60 scoop is a 60 scoop survivor. They would separate siblings, you know. There's a fantastic movie right out, or not movie, sorry, series out right now called Little Bird.
Okay.
And if you it is so well done, and it gives a really good uh explanation of what the 60s scoop
Okay.
was, and really supports adoptees in telling it. So I highly
Great.
recommend that.
I will look that
Yeah.
up. Incidentally, the same thing happened in Australia with the Aboriginal people. And
Yes.
there's a movie that was made 20 years ago about that called Rabbit Proof Fence, I think is what it's called. But
Oh,
yes, it
I'd
very
love to
much
watch
happened in
that.
Australia as well. And I dare say any place that was colonized by,
Yeah.
the Europeans. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so you traveled to this place and you ended up people that were helping you. One of them uh ended up being a relative of yours.
Yeah, Gabriel. So it was funny. I put out a Facebook post saying, "Hey, is there anybody at the Opaskwayak Cree Nation that knows any that is in film?" And somebody shot me Gabriel's, contact info. So I reached out to him, and for 3 months prior to going there, him and I would do Zoom calls, and plan out what we were going to do when we got there. And then when we did get there, I think it was on the second day or something, I met his
Yeah.
mom and told his mom who my great grandparents were, or who my grandparents were. And she said, "Oh, that was my mom's sister." So
Crazy. I have chills now. I have chills
yeah,
from that moment.
yeah.
Was that I'll cut this out if you want me to, but was that
Mhm.
that moment that was on camera, was that the first time she said that or did you have to reset that up?
No, that was the first time she said
No
that.
way.
And yes, and I had to fight with my editor to get that in, because the not because she didn't want it, but because it was like that was kind of the only moment that got captured. We turned all the cameras off and
Mm.
then had dinner. And so it was yeah, but I just insisted that it had to be in there, first of all because I just loved
She was
her
so dear.
so
Yeah.
much. And it was just a confirmation that, wow, like I really am connected here. I have roots here. I belong here. And then just the fact that the producer that I'd been talking to for 3 months was my cousin. And then it's funny because every email after that, he'd be like, "Hey,
Yep.
cuz."
Yep. Okay, that is the end of the first part of my conversation with Crystal. Crystal mentioned a Canadian TV series called Little Bird, Canadian TV series chronicling a single story about the Canadian 60s scoop. And I looked it up and it's streaming on PBS and Prime Video. Also, I mentioned the Australian film Rabbit Proof Fence, which is about the same thing that happened in Australia. And that is also streaming on Prime as well. Next episode, we will hear the remainder of my conversation with Crystal, who is a delightful human. How can people find you, Renee, if you want them
Oh,
to?
sure. Yeah. I mean, she's still talking to herself over on TikTok. If that's something you want to watch, nobody else is there.
You have so many things to say on TikTok. It's fascinating how your brain works.
Very bizarre. Very bizarre. I'm doing a new series about how I can't spell. If that's of any interest to
Yes,
you, enjoy
yes,
that.
I have noticed that.
It's
Something I also
real
saw
wild.
something about your hands have a mind of their own. Is that it? Yeah.
Yeah, which sounds dirty, but it's just yeah, they're just lazy. I just have lazy
Oh, that's
hands.
right. Your
Yeah.
hands just stay there and everything like
And
you
then
bring everything
else
to them.
happens. Yeah, exactly. So like when I is this not common? When I wash my face, my hands stay put and then I move my face around in them.
It is. I immediately checked myself to see what I do, and I do not do that.
What do you do?
My hands move.
You don't do that.
My
Everybody
hands
else moves.
No. Yes.
And then when I put on a shirt, I don't pull down my sleeves. I just have to like my arm shakes.
I may be guilty of that.
Okay.
Okay.
There you go.
But no, the face washing thing, definitely my hands move, not my
is a
face.
unique Renee thing. Okay.
Yes,
All right.
it's-
Well, and listen, as a good friend of mine, as my mentors, the person I want to impress most, I do need someone to give me an intervention and be like, Renee, I know someone told you show your weirdest self on TikTok, but you
No,
were
I love your
given
weirdest
bad advice.
self. It's not
Don't
bad
do it.
advice, and keep
Okay.
on keeping on.
All right. Well, if you want to
Please.
see my weirdest self, I'm on
Yes.
TikTok at Renee Colbert.
Find all things me at cutoffjeans.com. I blog sometimes. I add silly things sometimes. And as always, the truth is in your jeans.